What is going on, comic fam? It's your boy, the Bearded Comic Bro, and I am joined by creator Aaron Reynolds. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you. I first met you at Fan Expo in Cleveland.
Okay.
You did one of the craft. They had comics and cocktails. I'm looking at the poster there where they and they had a. It was just a fun event where we got to talk to different creators and drink cocktails. Like, what more do you want? That's
Right. I was so happy that they did that too. That was the first time that Fan Expo had done one of those. And apparently they just did like a bigger version of it at Dallas this past
oh
weekend. I,
nice.
I wasn't there, but that was like, so I was glad that our little one led to a bigger one and hopefully it keeps going.
Yes.
And my favorite was when they approached me to do it and they were like, Aaron, will you come to a meet and greet where people are going to drink cocktails and talk to you about like comics and stuff? And I was like, sure, how many drink tickets do I get? And there was this long pause and then there were like two. And I was like, okay.
All right. Well,
Yeah, yeah, no problem. That's how you get
I
a
know. I
comics
need to
person to
figure out
come
how
to
to
an event,
moderate
right?
that panel next time.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, but it was cool. And then that got me to go to your table and I discovered your book, Effin Birds, right there, with the lovely drawing of an owl. Um,
Hey, look at that.
so uh perfect wink. It's great. So let's jump it right into the book. How did this book come about?
Oh man. So I had been doing so I had a creative background
Okay.
and I worked in creative field and then I had a kid and I realized I wasn't suited for the financial vagaries of freelance life. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
I didn't like any of that. And so I took a job at a gigantic corporation and I worked there for 11 years. And about halfway through that time, I was like, oh, I need to do things for me again. Like I need to make stuff for myself. Because I mean, it was great that I had a creative outlet at work. Like it was a very creative role where I was,
Mhm.
but it didn't it didn't give me everything I wanted. And what I really wanted to do was make weird jokes. And so I was like, oh well, there's social media now, and I can go do weird jokes on Twitter and whatever. And um, I started doing that, and some of them would get popular, and then I would have to figure out what I could learn from what I had done. Like I would
Right.
make a weird stunt account, it would get a bunch of followers, and then I'd be like, and now what? And so two things happened at the same time. One was I had decided that I really didn't want to work at my job anymore. And so I needed a steady income from weird jokes on the internet if I was going to do more weird jokes on the internet. And the other was that I got approached by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation to do to pitch them a bunch of stuff for CBC comedy on Twitter. And CBC is oh my God, I hate this thing whenever I count. Did you see that? Did you see that go by? It's the
Yes.
hand gestures thing, and I don't know how to turn it off. And it's so upsetting to me. Okay, so anyways, um, I hope this is video and people aren't just hearing me talk about
Yeah. Oh no,
nonsense
it's
because
video.
these
Yeah.
balloons just went.
They'll see it. So if you are listening to the audio version, there was just a bunch of balloons that flew by.
I was counting with my fingers. I did one and then I did two, and then all these balloons came up because apparently I was making a peace sign, and that's how we live now. So CBC Comedy asked me for pitches for Twitter, and the CBC has a great like comedy history and tradition, and like I was super into the idea of working with them. I mean, the kids in the hall came from the CBC, and like I idolized Wayne and Schuster growing up, and they were CBC guys, and so like I wanted to be involved in that lineage, and I pitched them a bunch of stuff, and they hated all of it, and like hated like really really, and I was like this is not far off from what I was doing for myself. So like what has
Right.
changed when it gets into this zone. And I after a while realized that it wasn't me that was the problem. And I should, before having another meeting with them, take one of the ideas and do it myself and show them that I can do the kind of numbers they want, because they were very focused on getting
Mm.
engagement numbers, because they were kind of striking out on that, and that's why they were talking to me in the first place. And so I took the easiest and laziest idea and I took away all the parts that made it CBC related or even specifically Canadian. And then I did it myself for 2 weeks. And at the end of those 2 weeks, it was more popular than CBC comedy on Twitter. And that was Effin Birds. And that was just over 7 years ago. And it has been my day job for 5 years. So this is like them not paying me a small amount of money to do that for 2 weeks on their Twitter account is
Yeah.
like the greatest rejection ever, because I'm, I'm my kids get to go to school. It's great. You know, like,
So it literally turned out because of a rejection. You're like, well, let me just show you what it could have been. And
yeah,
wow,
yeah.
that's
And I was
fan-
like, my goal was like, let's readdress some of these other pitches that I think are the better pitches in this package, because I picked what I thought was the worst one. And like, I think this is the story of my life, is that other people think my worst ideas are my best ideas. I just gave a whole bunch of pitches to my publisher for another book, and they have picked what I would classify as the dumbest idea for a new book. And you know what? I'm not mad. I mean, it's going to be good. But yes, it's definitely comes from a long line of dumb ideas from Aaron Reynolds. So, you know,
that's so good. So it started out as a Twitter account, correct?
yeah,
And then,
yeah.
well, I guess real quick, what is Effin Birds like? If people are
Oh,
like, okay, what is this account? What is, kind of how that come about?
yeah. So it's a daily comic where I pair up. It's a one panel where I pair up my internal turmoil or negative thoughts with beautiful bird artwork. And it's the incongruousness that makes it really funny, but also it's me getting out everything from inside. And I think one of the funniest parts of the book, because the book specifically is kind of the first year and a bit of the comic and a lot of commentary to make it feel more like a bird guide rather than
Mm-hmm.
just a bunch of comics on pages. And um, you can see an awful lot about the place that I was working at the time when I started writing these comics. Like there are descriptions of there's a bird that's called the evaluative merganser, which is 100% the last manager I had at that job, you know. And so it's like actually like a spiteful, petty little book of score settling, you know. Yeah,
Yeah, perfect.
yeah.
Where was this idea? I know you said you had this long list of ideas, and you're like, I'm going to take what I think is my worst. Like to pair up, you know, bird art with, your thoughts that you had. Like, where would you like this will work, or maybe it won't.
Well, the reason I knew it would work is because it was sort of the culmination of three or four other things that I had done, some that were successful and some that weren't.
Okay.
And the ones that worked, actually, so one of the simplest thing that I did, that the thing that showed me that I could be successful on social media was back around when they finally cleared all the rights to Adam West Batman and released the whole series, finally after that long drought. I picked up on a running gag in the show that I thought was the most deliriously delightful running gag as much as I looked, I couldn't find anybody who had ever written anything about it. And so I ended up making a Twitter account devoted only to that running gag and cataloging it. And the Twitter account was called Bat Labels. And it was just me cataloging every time an object had a label on it that was totally over-explanatory and useless. Like my favorite one is Batman shouts, "Quickly, Robin, to the giant lighted lucite map of Gotham City!" And they run across the Batcave, and there's a big map made of lucite, and it says "giant lighted lucite map of Gotham City" across the top. And it's so funny. And like I really enjoyed doing that, but I what I learned from that account was that if I timed the posts right, if I paid attention to what was happening on social media and I posted something that felt like it was commenting on it, even if it wasn't, the
Mhm.
numbers would be huge. And I took that energy into everything else that I did when it was for social. And I mean, Effin Birds being entirely like vibe and emotion based, like part of my day, if I want to have a successful day on social media, part of it is what's everybody talking about today? Oh yeah, this is the right comic for today.
Mm.
You know, because because the comic is actually written about just over a year ahead right now, and so I have a very deep well to draw from when things happen. And people are always like, "Did you just have that ready?" And I was like, "You know what? I did." Because I felt
Yeah.
that emotion a year ago, and then I wrote it down, and I made the comic, and now it's just been sitting here waiting for me to deploy it. But there was that, and I did one that was called Swear Trek, which was the like an incredibly dumb idea where I just took episodes of Star Trek and I chopped out sequences from them, and I wrote new dialogue and I put it in as captions and I posted them as animated gifs, and those were huge. And I mean, there was the lazy joke of you're putting the F word into Star Trek, which stopped really being a lazy joke once they started putting the F word on Star Trek.
Yep.
But the it wasn't just that; it was just the way that I gave every character a slightly new personality. I just unleashed them all a little bit. And my favorite one was a sequence from the Star Trek animated series where Captain Kirk is talking to two lumpy headed aliens. They're two guys with big yellowish round heads with lumps, and they look really pissy. And he looks at them and he smirks and he says something. And so I changed it so he says, "You guys look like my balls." And then they both react in horror. And I was like, okay, that was good. And there's something about like the incongruousness of putting that into Star Trek, and then the vibes based posting, like all of those things kind of were in this like pile of like, if I wanted to make a successful thing, these are the things that I need to do if I
Mm.
want it to be successful on social media. Out in the other, in the real world is a whole nother thing, but I was at the time just focused on like what would I put together to make these successful on social, and that was it.
So you had some very niche, market. Like, man, I would love to just sit and like, I'm going to be watching Batman 66 so I can find signs and labels. It's
That was
so good.
I was To be fair, I was really I had a very bad health challenge, and one of the
Mm,
problems with it was my job involved speaking all day every day, and I couldn't speak for more than 3 months, and so I was off work. I was on a leave of absence from work because I couldn't do my job, and I was trying not to spiral into a depression,
yeah.
and Netflix wasn't helping because Netflix was super like, "Oh, you watched Only Lovers Left Alive? How about Blue Ruin? Would you like to watch that?" I'm like, "Oh, I mean, I would, but also, is that good for my mental health?"
Yeah.
But I did really enjoy both of those films. Do you know Only Lovers Left
I
Alive? I don't feel
don't.
like nobody knows it. It's Jim Jarmusch's vampire hangout comedy. Not
Hmm.
comedy, dramedy kind of.
Okay.
It's a
Okay.
Imagine vampires that are just really old, and they're just like, yeah, now what, right? How do you keep going after 1,000 years, you know? And it's
Yeah.
it's it's really touching and beautiful, but also incredibly sad, and definitely about a lot of people thinking about death. um Tom Hiddleston's great in it, and Tilda Swinton, and who else? John Hurt. Like, it's a great cast, really great
Oh,
cast.
wow. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Also, it cares so much about music, and like I love music, and so to have a film that the one vampire is obsessed with music is the only thing that keeps him going. Is that there's always new music, and like just him, just him dropping in on a bar in some place like some exotic faraway location because he heard there was a good band there, and
It's
that's like I love that movie a lot. But anyways, yeah. So my antidote to myself was watch '60s Batman, and I had the time, and once I noticed the gag and started cataloging it, it was like, well, I guess I'm doing this.
so good. I grew up watching Batman 66, and I'm going back and watching it with my kids right now. And
It's
so
so good.
now it's going to be so obvious in my mind. I'm like, oh, there it is. There's a
Bat
label.
label, bat label. Yep. Also look for bears. There are taxidermy bears far more often than you would expect on that show. They're all over the place.
Note to self.
Oh,
All
and
right.
a baby blue Dodge A100 van that becomes every other kind of vehicle. At one point, it's a police like prisoner transfer van. At one point, it's the Batmobile parachute pickup service van. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's a dry cleaning van.
That's so good. So you take all these things that you've learned from social media of the other accounts and things like that. Effin Birds comes around. Where did how's the process for you of like the art pairing it up with, whatever the saying is going to be for that daily comic? Like, how do you go through that?
Right. I think part of the fun of this was once it became clear that it was a job,
Yeah.
and that it was going to pay the bills, I had to treat it very much like a job. And part of being funny is feeling like you're not funny sometimes, and so I have art days, and I have writing days. And so days where I'm writing jokes, and there's days where I'm prepping bird artwork, and I'm going through volumes on my shelf up here. I have 5 different copies of Thomas Bewick's History of British Birds. Of various vintages. And like so I mean, I end up looking at a lot of vintage bird art, and then putting together stuff and making it ready to
Hmm.
go. And I can do those on days when I don't feel funny. And then on days when I feel funny, I can just start pulling, this ready and prepared bird artwork and start putting comics together. Stare into the bird's eyes for a while and figure out what joke went with this bird.
Yeah. So it started out online social media. It still is an online comic. It's a daily comic that people can still get and still read. But where was it then that you're like, let's put this into a book format so people can obtain it too?
Yeah, I got approached by a small publisher in the UK called Unbound, and it was their idea to make it a book. I had thought about a book, and I sort of dismissed the idea because I didn't think that the comic was particularly book-like.
Mm,
Even Garfield works in a book because there's a certain amount of advancement of story in those 4 panels. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And there are certain themes that play out over a week of comics that then it works together as a book. And what I'm doing is these one panelers that just don't have any relation to each other at all. And I was like, I don't feel like personally that that's a satisfying book. But my UK publisher suggested that it should be a bird spotting guide. And then I was like, oh, and then I can write habitats and identifying characteristics of really the human beings who inspired the comics in the first place. I was like,
Yeah.
great, done. That's a beautiful idea. And I worked on it for I still had a full-time job at the time, so I think I worked on it a period of about 6, 7 months. I think I blew my deadline by like a month because I'm terrible. Um, yeah, and then the thing about Unbound is it's a semi crowdfunding platform. The
Okay.
idea is they use the pre-orders to fund the print run. And at that point, it's released to bookstores and also to all the people who pre-ordered. And the financial splits were real solid, and they made sense to me. And so I was like, oh, and the thing that they said, if the book is a failure, you can buy the printed copies they were something like £2 a copy because they're in the UK. And
Yeah.
I was like, so that's like, I don't know, like $3. It's like $3. I can't get this book printed at this quality for $3. So worst case scenario, I'm gonna have $3,000 worth of my own book in my house that I can sell online because I know I can sell them online by myself. You
Yeah.
know, and the great news is that we didn't have that problem. But I'm a little black rain cloud kind of guy, and so I was like, oh well, what's the worst case scenario, and can I live with that? And because the worst case scenario was so great, I was like, oh yeah, this is a no brainer. I'll do this. But anyways, partway through the crowdfund, Penguin Random House jumped in and wanted to buy the book, and so that was kind of great.
Yeah. I'm not bad at all on that. So
Yeah,
you go around with this with your book with your because it's on merchandise as well. But you go to a lot of comic cons. It seems
I
like
do. I do a lot
is
of
that
Comic
true?
Cons. Yeah, well, so it's been really interesting because social media has stopped being a place where you can really grow
Mm,
easily. Like it's the breakout successes are fewer and farther between. It is only larger voices that are really being seen. It's feeling a lot like television was. You know what I mean? Like I was never going to break into television or radio because I was too weird, but social media let me like break in. But now social media is right to that place where television and radio were, where it's like there's a lot of gatekeepers and you're probably not going to get past them. And even if you're established, it's hard to get traction these days. And so uh, it, it, I was like, okay, well, what's the way that I grow this? Because there's only so many people who are on social media, and then there's the whole rest of the
right.
world. So how do I reach them? And the original answer was a book tour, and I was like, well, my publisher's it's not a big book, it's a small book, so they're not going to fund any kind of large book tour. And then I was like, well, what's a book tour that I can fund and financially like make money on? And it won't be a book tour of like bookstores, because even my best bookstore signing, I did 250 books, which is great, but that's like me getting $500 6 months from now,
Yeah.
and like I can't pay for the flight and the hotel and the dinner, with
Yeah.
that, that's kind of it. Um, and so Comic Cons was the way. And they have big audiences. You can sell a fairly large number of books at them. Sometimes, depending on the show, some of them will pay for my flights and hotels, and some of them, if they're big enough that they know I'll come anyways, they won't. And that's fine. That's all good. Like I understand they've all got budgets to work with,
Hmm.
and I got my budget to work with, and they got their budget to work with, so it's all good. Um, But yeah, so Comic Cons just seemed like a real natural fit. And after I did a couple of them that I didn't have to travel far for, that was sort of like, okay, I can tour this. I can do this at a much larger level. Because I think I did a bunch of them in Canada because I'm Canadian. And once that was successful, I was like, okay, I'm on the road. Let's go. United States, UK, let's do this. And so it's been a good time.
So you said you started this what 7 years ago? When did the book
Yeah.
process come about? 2 years later?
Yeah. Well, the book, yeah, it was, I would say it was in the first, maybe the second year of the comic.
Okay.
Yeah, the start of the second year of the comic, and the book came out. The book's about to have its fifth anniversary. We're um, a couple months away from the fifth anniversary of the book, which
Okay.
is great. And actually, and what's funny is that I've continued to have a publishing contract since then, and I've published stuff every single year, but it hasn't been more books. It's been calendars because we do a page a day calendar every year, which is all new material and planners and wall calendars and desk pads and stuff like that. And we're kind of not messing with the book because the book sells as many copies every week as it did in its first year. And so, like, the thing is, it sales in the first year, we're just kind of like, oh, this is good. We're all happy with how this went. But
Yeah.
once you get to year five of it still doing exactly that, everybody's like, this is an unqualified success and we're very happy. But also, let's not mess with it.
So you're still putting out a whole bunch of comics daily, and they're going more towards the calendars right now. If you read than a book, because the book's like, no, we're maintaining where we were 5 years ago, so let's
Yeah,
stay with it.
we're good.
That's
Yeah, we don't
fantastic.
want to mess with it. Yeah. Well, I'm like, and you know what? I'm kind of like, I would love to have a new Effin Birds book. And then I was also like, you know what I like doing is not doing any work and still getting paid. That part I love. So I'm okay with it. Let's there was a really great Rob Long, the comedy writer, he on his podcast one time he was talking about how you get a writer to cut a joke from a script. And he said that you just have to tell them you've been paid for this joke. And now we're going to take it out of this script. And you are free to take that joke and use it somewhere else and get paid a second time. And I was like, oh, that appeals to me so much. Doing the work once and getting paid twice. I love this. It's the story of being a writer right there.
It's so good. So, do you have some like favorite of your comics of like where you're like, okay, this one, like, I mean, eat farts. That's just like that's great, right? Like, you got a
Right.
bird. It's so good.
Well, so the thing about the Eat Farts comic too is it's a very, it tells you what you're going to get without being the rudest thing in the book.
Mm,
Do you know what I mean? And so I
yeah.
put it on stickers. I give away hundreds of stickers that say eat farts at every show because it's how I introduce myself to somebody who does not know what they're about to see at my table. People walk by. If they make eye contact, I ask them if they would like a sticker that says eat farts. And they're either going to say yes and be all excited, or they're going to say no. And I don't have to talk to them anymore because they're just not my people. It's good. Um, I love the really weird ones. And I love some of them, and this is the advantage of having an editor. I love some of them that I know are not as funny to everybody else, but they're funny to me because of what was in my head when I was working on them.
Mm,
Like there's one with a raven that says, try not to set your dick on fire. And that was my comic when Elon Musk bought Twitter. And I mean, the man set his dick on fire. He did not take my advice at all. He's straight up every day out there setting his dick on fire. Um, but I really like that one. But I think that like I like it because of the context. And
right.
so it's great to have an editor who is gonna be there to say, yeah, this one's not as good, because they don't have the context, and so they can evaluate it, just on its merits, which is great.
What's also great is like I'm reading this book and like there's a couple times I'm like, there's just a hermit crab drawing in
Oh yeah,
there,
the
or
hermit crab. I love the hermit
or an
crab.
elephant, and then you're just like, don't ask me about this. Like, just
Yeah, that's me trolling. Like that's really me trolling the internet because people make up rules for my comic. And then they get upset if I break the rules that they made up for my comic that I didn't have any awareness of. And I understand that that's people like just like it's how their brains work, right?
right.
Pattern matching and whatever else. But people are like, well, where's the swear word in this one? Well, it's like, I don't know. Is it funnier with a swear word or is it funny just the way it is?
Yeah.
Like I'm writing the funniest joke, not the joke that conforms to a set of rules. And so whenever I get a lot of those in a week, I tend to make a pattern breaker joke just to like, kind of be a dick to them. And that's where the hermit crab that says, "Look, asshole, I don't have time to explain," comes from.
Yes, yes. So good. So good. And again, gang, like if you haven't checked out the website Effin Birds, like the merchandise is you have everything you could ever imagine that you'd want birds saying stuff on. I mean, there's a lady holding a beach towel that just says eat farts on.
I love that beach towel so much. That was the first time I knew we could do something really stupid and people would buy it. The Eat Farch beach towel and the oh my God, what the fuck shower curtain are like my favorite things.
Are those like top sellers? Do you have top sellers that are like people always are going
I
to
have
buy this quote or on put it on this thing?
What's really funny is I will launch a new piece of merchandise and the top sellers will then sell. And if I don't launch a new piece of merchandise, the top sellers won't move. But it's me reminding people that I have new stuff that sells the existing stuff. So that Starling that says I am a goddamn delight outsells everything else by a factor of 10. I can put it on a new product and it'll just like go. I did a big, beautiful enamel pin of it this year because I used to do a little lapel pin of it. And I was like, oh, let's change things up and let's make a nice
Yeah.
big one. And that one outsells all the other pins, by I think a factor of 5. I think I double ordered it compared to the others, but I've reordered it twice before the initial runs of the other new pins have gone through. So like, you know, it is what it is. But the Eat Farts bird ends up on a lot of stuff. Actually, so my San Diego Comic Con exclusive gag, because I love to do a gag for San Diego every year. The gag this year is a Hawaiian shirt that says "Eat Farts" with it has a beautiful seascape printed with a bunch of little birds flying away and little text that says "Eat Farts." It's quite beautiful.
It's it's touching. It's moving. I love it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's so good.
It's a,
So
it's professional. It's got a collar,
right, yeah,
It's a
it's
button-up shirt
classy.
with a collar. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
for a Comic Con too to wear that. That's very classy. If you have a collar on your shirt at Comic Con, you're classing up the joint.
Exactly. That's right.
So we talked a lot about Effin Birds. There's no new book coming out right now, but if you want stuff, you can go online as well as the web, not the web calendar, the actual daily calendar that you can get in print, and you can get those. Are there other things that you're working on, you're creating, or is
Oh
this just kind
yeah.
of your wheelhouse right now?
Well, so one of the things about a daily comic is it's a lot of work to do a daily comic. And so the daily comic is always the primary focus, but
Mhm.
because the start of June was my deadline for all the comics for 2026, because 2025 calendars are hitting bookstores right now. So it means 2026, we
Yeah,
got to get well into production, right? And
yeah,
so I usually around this point take a break of at least a couple of weeks from Effin Birds and do something else. And so I'm in my something else phase right now. And what's really funny is I I pitched 3 things and I got yeses for 2 of them. And then it was like, oh, well, now how do I decide what to do? And then when I was trying to decide what to do with my 2 yeses, I had a third idea that I thought was even better. And so I'm like, oh, I'm like, well, I only have so much time. I got to pick one of these. And so I'm trying to decide right now between, I mean, I have the strongest yes for a thing called Space Werewolf, which is set in the late 60s, a straight ahead comic about a failed Soviet moon mission that would have beat the Americans to the moon, but they had to cover it up because one of the crew was a werewolf and they didn't understand that it's always full moon on the moon. And so that's a totally like play it straight, kind of like absurdist, but also I'm on my bookshelf up here. I'm actually looking at the 1967 Soyuz like schematics and manual and Red Star in Orbit and a book about Soviet space disasters, a whole bunch of James Oberg books. Like I it's a goofball piece of science fiction where we take the science as seriously as possible. And aside from the werewolf shit, it's like very very grounded in realism. And so I mean having such a good time writing that and thinking about that, that I think that's what we're doing. But I also have this very sad story about a Sasquatch that finds an abandoned cell phone in the woods and becomes obsessed with consumerism, and has to go get a job and to maintain his lifestyle. That was like, oh, I'm as I'm writing this outline, I'm like, these are all of my feelings about social media. Oh my God, these are all of my feelings about working for a living. Oh my God. And I was just getting it all out there on the page. And so it might just be cathartic enough to have written that outline and then go back to Space Werewolf, or I might have to finish off the Sasquatch thing first. We'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see what happens.
So like, well, Effin Birds is a daily comic that got turned into a book. Like when you're writing something for this, is it what type of format are you writing then for? Is it for a novel, a comic, or
These ones, yeah, these ones are both comics. And part
okay?
of that is because having done the Effin Birds book and having had consistent great sales for 5 years, it opens the door. People want more things from me
Yeah.
in that format, and so that's great. I mean, I could do whatever I want on social media and just go do it, but if I want something with a paycheck attached to it, I'm gonna take advantage of this moment that I'm in, where people have a certain amount of trust in me to deliver something that will sell books. And
Right.
so like, yeah,
So,
I'm in for that, you know.
gang, you got to go check it out. Get the book, find something, find one that you love, get it on a mug, get it on anything. They're literally, it seems like you can get it on anything. Playing cards, you've got them all. You've got all the merch you
Oh,
could want.
and playing cards are in your local Barnes and Noble. You can find those everywhere now. So that's great.
Really, that's awesome.
Yep. Yeah. That was Barnes and Noble just bought almost the entire print run of 2025 calendars, and
Okay.
it's June. So we had to actually go back and do a second printing of most of the calendar formats,
That,
so that other stores can just have some. And so it's like, oh, I like that a lot for me.
yeah, Joey, that's good. So, well, Aaron, where can people follow along with you and stay up to date? And
Hmm.
what you're working on, what you got coming up?
There's a page on effinbirds.com that's called Read the Comic, and it has links to every social platform. But everywhere I'm at, my handle is Effin Birds, EFFIN Birds, and I'm if it's a reasonably large social platform, I'm there. It's there are a lot of them, and I'm on a lot of them. Thankfully, there are tools like Buffer, which will post to like 7 of them at the same time. So at least I can schedule the comic once across Mastodon, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. What else is in there?
Blue Sky. Now there's so many.
Blue Sky, I gotta post there manually,
Oh,
man.
dude, yeah, there's
Oh,
so many.
it's like work.
uh,
Threads,
the worst.
LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn mostly to troll. It's great. And I mean, if you follow Effin Birds, all the stuff shows up there. I post about events and appearances, and what I'm up to next, and
And that'll
what
still be new
interviews
stuff
I just
new
did.
projects will still be in on that one. Cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, I have a personal Instagram, but it's mostly like dumb stuff and kid pictures. And I had a personal Twitter account that I've just let become dormant because I need to spend less time on Twitter. So,
As we all do.
yes, exactly. I managed to break myself of the Twitter habit. Felt really good about it. I can check my replies once a day and be good. It's all good.
Fantastic. Well, Aaron, thanks so much for taking some time to talk about your work, all your books, all the comics and stuff that you're working on. It's been a delight to have you. And I look forward to catching you at another Comic Con here sometime.
Hey, I really appreciate it, and thanks for inviting me, and thanks for coming to that event in Cleveland, because that was a good time.
It was a really good time. So, gang, also, if you ever go to a fan expo and they have a comics and cocktail event, go check it out. It's
Yeah,
great. You
it's
might find
good.
your
It's a
next
good
favorite
time.
writer there too. So,
Exactly.
well, with that being said, gang, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.